Okay, friends, let's talk a little bit about logistics first today, and then we're going to do a wrap-up lecture on Aristotle, followed by an introductory uh, lecture on Augustine. Okay, and we are a bit behind in our syllabus, but we're going to try to catch up and be all caught up in 2 weeks, I hope. We will see. Okay, so first of all, logistics. I'm looking for... So here's what to expect for the test coming up. The test will open on Tuesday, okay, and it will be available. I'm going to make it available through Friday, okay, and you can take it at any time during that window. Once you start taking it, you'll need to take it in that session, okay. It'll be available through Blackboard in this week's course content module. If you have any questions, the easiest thing is to email me. I have made up a review sheet and we'll be sending that around early this afternoon. Come on in. So when you cover things in review for the test, focus especially on the parts of Plato's dialogues, the parts of Aristotle's ethics that we have featured in class. Okay, although all of the dialogues are fair game, all of what we read in the ethics is fair game. So that means I can ask questions from anything in the reading materials listed on the syllabus, and I will. But I will ask more specific questions about the stuff that we have covered in class. Those questions about the things we've covered in class will be a bit more granular. So please do review in preparation for that. Cover some of the background. This is not a history class, so we're here to talk about concepts and philosophical issues. But sometimes it is important to set those concepts and issues in a historical context. So do cover a bit of the historical backgrounds for the thinkers that we've been studying. There are introductions in the texts, and you can also find materials on their historical backgrounds in our lecture videos, because I try to give a little bit of a historical background on each thinker as we cover that thinker. Okay, go back and look over the lecture videos. This will be an open book test, so you'll have a chance to look over these things during the test. However, you will do much better on the test almost certainly if you have pre-prepped by doing some review beforehand, so you know where everything is or know the answer off the top of your head. Okay, so you'll do much better that way. Questions or comments about the exam? Yeah, so it'll open this Tuesday. You can take it any time between Tuesday and Friday. Okay? Other questions? Yes.
I'm not going to take it last second, but just in case, what's the cutoff date on Friday?
11:59 p.m. Yeah, don't take it at 11 p.m. on Friday. That's a bad idea. But I appreciate the question. Much better is to prep hard. Take it Thursday. Take it Wednesday. Something like that. Okay? Other questions? Yes?
So the review sheet will be distributed?
I am going to email around a review sheet this afternoon. Okay. For sure. Okay. All right. Okay, let's get started with today's lecture. So I'm going to do some wrap up on Aristotle's Nick Ethics. If you did bring it, please pull it out. If you didn't, don't worry about it. I recognize that we are way off from where the syllabus says we're supposed to be right now. This has been a crazy school year, guys. I haven't ever had a school year like this. We have just covered the topic of Aristotle and moral responsibility in Book 3 of the Nicomachean Ethics. Okay, and if you haven't seen the lecture for that, I commend that lecture to you. It's available on the YouTube channel. We are moving today to Book 5. In Book 3, Aristotle assigns moral responsibility on the basis of free will, and in Book 5, Aristotle talks about the topic of justice, which of course is a very important ethical concept. So we'll start there. And in particular, what we will cover today is distributive justice. Okay, there are obviously many different facets to the word justice. When I say the word justice, just as an intuitive exercise, what do people think of? When I say he was justice was done to him, or when I say something like we need to go to a court of justice about this, or justice is something that we have to think about as we make decisions of distributing our resources. What do you think of when you think of the word justice? What does it recall to mind? Yeah.
There's an expressive way to do something justice, to do something correctly, or if you serve justice to, I guess, administer punishment, just punishment in regards to what someone did wrong.
Sure, yeah.
Doing something right as well, correcting something that was done incorrectly would be doing something justice.
Excellent. Those are all great facets to justice. Justice has different facets, but basically I think at bottom it means giving someone what he or she is due, or what he or she merits. Now, if Aragorn is standing before the gates of Mordor and says, "Bring the Black Lord out, let justice be done upon him," what Sauron is due is some sort of punishment, because that's what he deserves. But if I say, let's think about issues of justice as we distribute our resources here, and the implication is we need to think about the impoverished. Presumably the impoverished in a circumstance like that are due good things, rewards, okay, which they aren't otherwise getting. So it is giving to someone what he or she is due, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Now, the topic of distributive justice is a really important topic, guys, because look, this is really fundamental to philosophical ethics. How should we distribute resources in society? What is a just distribution of our resources? What should be the principles on the basis of which a system of distribution should take place in our society? Let me start us off with a quick intuitive exercise. Okay, let me ask you to imagine 3 scenarios. A, B, and C. And we'll say these scenarios are all taking place in the context of a roommate lottery. Okay, several of us live on campus, yes? Are all of us commuters in this class? No one lives on campus? Okay, well imagine you did. Okay. And imagine that you're in a roommate lottery. Okay, and there are different opportunity sets available to you. So we'll say in scenario 1, you could have a 7 in 10 chance of getting a great roommate, and a 3 in 10 chance of getting a horrible roommate. And in scenario 3 or C, we'll say, well, let's go to B first. We'll say grade is 7 in 10, or grade is 4 in 10. So is 4 in 10. And horrible, we'll make that 2 in 10. And let's say scenario 3, a so-so roommate, the odds of a so-so roommate are 10 in 10. Okay, and let me define what I mean here. great roommate. Lifelong friends. You guys are in each other's weddings. You can share your secrets with this person. This person supports you, helps care for you when you're sick, etc. Okay, horrible. This roommate's awful, right? I'm not just talking dirty laundry. This person uses your toothbrush. Maybe you even, gets up at all hours of the night to, play video games with friends. Heck, you might even get sexiled from your room, okay? It's pretty bad scenario. So roommate, you just kind of live alongside each other. There's no real interaction. You just sort of, are ships passing in the night. It's not like you're, upset at your roommates. There's just no connection there. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. All right, show of hands. Who would choose, out of these distribution scenarios in the roommate lottery, who would prefer this as your possible scenario over the others? Show of hands. Anybody? Would anybody be a gambler and choose scenario A? All right, let me go to the safe one. Who would choose C? Come on, guys, you got to vote. Omar would choose C. Okay, who would choose B? Most of us would choose B. Choice? B? 4 out of 5 would choose B. Okay, defend your positions, those of you who chose B. Yeah.
This is from a mathematical standpoint. Theoretically, you have an 8 out of 10 chance of getting something that's either okay or good.
Okay, that's correct.
Better
Yes.
than option A. And with option C, there's safety, but the appeal would be is that there's also a chance of getting the great.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay, good. Is that a general consideration for others? Yes? Okay, interesting. I'm fascinated that no one chose this. I would have chosen A. I don't know, maybe I have a gambling streak, but like the odds of a great roommate are the best of any of the scenarios. But I understand the idea of at least an adequate option is being maximized there. Okay, let me change this up. Suppose it's not a roommate lottery. Suppose it's a hospital lottery. What kind of a distribution scenario would you prefer here? You're in an accident on the highway, and the chopper has to care flight you to a local hospital. They check first on your insurance card before they fly you to see who's in network for you. Would you prefer a scenario where the odds of getting a great hospital are 7 in 10 and a horrible one 3 in 10, 4 in 2, or a so-so hospital 10 in 10? Let me describe what great would be. They patch you up and you're out in 2 weeks after this bad car accident. No long-term issues or effects. So-so, it's 9 months, heavy bills, lots of money spent, but no long-term effects. Horrible is also 9 months, also heavy bills, but you're going to walk with a limp for at least the next 4 years. 3 years. 3 years. Okay, so that's, it's bad. Like, horrible is pretty bad. Okay, now given those options, how many would choose A? Omar, thank you. Okay, yep, thank you. 3 of us. That's terrific. Why would you choose A, Riley?
I had a surgery once, and it was like okay, but even though the scars like still hurt, it's still painful.
Uh-huh.
And if it's only for 3 years, and there's a possibility of getting a great care.
You could be out in 2 weeks. The odds are pretty good, 7 in 10. Okay, would anybody play it safe? My insurance purchasers, really? Why so?
There are some things I believe you can't compromise on. Health is one of them. I wouldn't risk my life with a horrible hospital.
Okay. All right,
At least
fascinating.
That's how I think about it.
Similar?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I don't want to risk myself.
It seems like a more important choice than the roommate lottery, doesn't it? Okay, fascinating. All right, let's go to the most important choice of all. Maybe the most important choice of all. The lottery of life. And by that I mean the circumstances into which you are born. Okay, Imagine yourself able to choose the society into which you are born. And from before your birth, you can choose a society where socioeconomic advantages are distributed in this way. 7 and 10 are great, 3 and 10 are horrible. 4 and 10 are great, 4 are so-so, and 2 are horrible. Or everybody's kind of equal, and it's all sort of so-so. Okay, and by great, I mean your parents love you, there's lots of money, lifelong support system, educational opportunities, everything you could possibly want is made available to you as you journey through the path of life. Okay, horrible, parents are alcoholics, maybe the father's not even in the picture, there's no money for anything, few educational opportunities, you are very unlikely to rise out of your class station as you go through life. Parents are negligent, but they love you. Some educational opportunities are available. Maybe instead of helping you with your homework, they mostly watch television at night. It's not a really bad scenario, but at least the parents are both in the picture, and maybe you got a brother who likes you too. So it is what it is. Okay, who would choose this? Two of us. Okay. Let me go to the opposite extreme. The fully egalitarian society, equal, everybody equal. Who would choose this? 2, 3. Okay, nobody would choose the one in the middle. Gamblers. Why? Why A? Dude, that is exactly the way I think of it too. I would gamble in all of these scenarios on A. I'm totally on board with that. And if you lose, you're hosed, but your chances are the best. At least that's the way I see it. Insurance purchasers? Defend your choices.
I feel like life is what you mentioned. Even
Okay.
even ignoring you can still make your life.
Okay. All right. Good. Yeah, I do believe that too. The statistics show that the vast majority of Americans die in the same socioeconomic circumstances as they were born into. So the idea of social mobility is for most people a fiction. But it's not for some people. It does not have to be you. So I tend to agree with that as well. At the same time, I guess I have a gambling streak, so I would choose that. Okay. Why do I share these different scenarios? They are different ways of thinking about the distribution of resources in society. Some societies are like this, where some people have a lot and other people have very little. The haves and the have-nots, and there's a huge gulf between them. You might think of, if you know your history, you might think of pre-revolution France, where the aristocrats had it all, and the ordinary workers had almost nothing. Okay, America is actually increasingly moving towards a society like this. Okay, we're not quite there yet, but we are increasingly moving towards a society where the billionaires have it all and the ordinary people have very little. At the opposite extreme, we have other societies where things are really equal. Maybe the government, using the taxation system, taxes the wealthy really heavily. Maybe it taxes everyone heavily, but the wealthy most of all. And everybody is kind of equal in the resources that they have available. This is much more common in the European Union, for instance, or countries in Scandinavia, where taxation rates are astronomical. 70%, 75% of your income goes to the government through taxation. But the government pays for your health care, government pays for education, all of your potential needs are taken care of. It's kind of an equal, everybody's equal view of the way resources should be distributed in society. Yeah?
They're taking care of, but how is the quality?
Sure, so-so. Not real bad, not great either. Maybe you have to wait in line for medical care, wait several weeks or months to see a doctor. Maybe maybe there are shortages, but they're not real bad shortages. You eventually do get the product. It just takes a while or something. Yeah, so. When societies are like this, where some have a lot and others have a little, it is usually because they're societies, at least I should qualify this, in the post-Enlightenment era, so in our current time, it is usually because they're societies that privilege liberty over equality. They privilege freedom more than equality. So let me just put that up here. Liberty over equality. And the opposite is the case down here. Societies where everybody is approximately the same in the resources that they have are what they are because equality is privileged over liberty. Why, when societies privilege liberty over equality, do they end up looking like that? Well, it's like this. Some people make good choices, other people make bad choices. Some people are fortunate or lucky and make it through with few or no health complications, while others are not so fortunate or lucky and have horrible circumstances that happen to them. And because these societies maximize liberty or privilege freedom, freedom of choice, freedom to deploy your resources as you please, they end up having some people rise to the top and others fall to the bottom. Because people can choose. There's not a coercive redistribution system constantly interfering. Okay, at the opposite extreme is this kind of a society where maybe a central distribution authority like the government regularly uses the taxation system to coercively redistribute the resources. That can make everybody more or less equal. Those who make a lot can be brought down. Those who make a little can be brought up. And everybody can be made more or less equal. But in such a society, it is usually at the expense of people's freedom. Because those people who would otherwise be able to deploy their resources for private choices now have to give their resources to the government in such a society to choose on their behalf. You can think of this in terms of the amount of time each year that you work for the government. Okay, I think I work for the government for about 3.5 months every year. And after that, my income is my own. In some societies, people might work for the government for 9.5 months every year, and then after that, their income is their own, because their taxation might be at a rate of 75% or more. Such societies look very equal in the resource distributions, but it comes at the expense of people's choices. Okay, questions so far about the distributive justice topic before I mention what Aristotle's own views are on this? Yes?
Is there a reason why this distributive justice topic gives me capitalism and communism vibes from it?
Well, it's because the question of how things should be divided up is a really big question on which there has been huge dispute over the centuries. And capitalism, with some exceptions, right, I'm speaking generally here, is a system that tends to look more like this. And socialism or communism even looks more like this, where things are shared among all, as opposed to some being able to have what's their own private property over and against that of others. And let me tell you, philosophers have fought about this, cats and dogs, down through the centuries. Boy, this topic really makes people angry, and they hate each other over this one. Because some people think that this kind of a society is deeply immoral. Because this kind of a society, it leads to impoverished people, like really impoverished people, some of whom have very little. Others think that this kind of a society down here, where everyone's so-so, this is deeply immoral. Because this kind of a society uses coercion to undermine people's freedoms so as to make everyone all alike. So, I mean, people like really have very different views on this. Aristotle's own view is that the basis for the distribution of resources in society ought to be moral merit. Okay, so Aristotle's view, I'm not going to, not associating it with that, I'm just putting it up here on the board. Aristotle's view is that moral merit is the principle on which we should distribute the resources in society. Those who are most morally meritorious should get the most. And the reason why is because he thought that that is the just thing to do. They are those who are most deserving, morally speaking, of resources, because what they are doing is the most valuable or the most intrinsically worthwhile of what anybody is doing in the society. Now, let me just ask, by way of comparison, does this look like anything that we are familiar with in modern societies? In other words, are the people who make the most in America the social workers, the pastors, the teachers, the priests, the people whose lives are devoted to service work? Is that the case? No, not at all. If you know your salary numbers, those people on balance make a lot less than other kinds of people. Now, yes, doctors are service workers and they make a lot more. So there is that. That's an exception, maybe. Maybe doctors are a moral meritorious exception. But if you look at the people who make a lot in contemporary America, it's things like corporate execs, of course, but also film stars, music stars, sports celebrities, people like that. Okay, those people make a lot of money in contemporary society. Do they make it on the basis of their moral merit? Not at all, right? Not really. In fact, some of the highest paid people in the United States right now are like really bad people. But they get a lot of money because what they do is valued by a lot of their peers. A lot of other people are willing to give them money because they value what they do. Okay, so let me just take an example, right? So Kylie Jenner is a really bad person. Okay, agreed? Oh, come on, don't just look stone-faced at me. All right, well, Kimmy K is a bad person, okay? Incredibly selfish, like overwhelmed with her own self and self-advancement at the expense of everyone else. Obviously a life that is a soap opera and that has been lived in the public eye so as to manipulate others. Okay, all right, that's just me, but I think that's a pretty common opinion. we all like to follow the Kardashians. I don't, but many do. Maybe you guys don't. Because their lives are a soap opera that is entertaining. Okay, why do they make a lot? Why does Kylie Jenner make a lot? Why does Kimmy K make a lot? Because they offer something that others consider to be valuable. Because what they do is something that others are willing to compensate them highly for. In other words, we have liberty in our society for people to choose how to distribute their resources. And if they want to distribute their resources by buying Kylie Jenner cosmetics or something, they can do that. In a society that maximizes liberty, what you often get is a society where people who are morally meritorious don't actually make very much. And those who are not morally meritorious can make a lot. And the reason why is it's based on whatever people want to do with their resources. And if they want to compensate athletes a whole lot, if they want to pay LeBron a whole lot of money, they can do that. Okay, and LeBron's an amazing athlete and does, amazing things. Right, but he's playing a game at the end of the day. If people want to compensate somebody a whole lot, they can do that in a society that maximizes liberty. But what we have is very different than what Aristotle conceived of as being an appropriately just society in distributive terms. Questions or comments or reflections on any of these things? Reflections or comments or... Everybody cool? Cool? Okay. I personally think that Aristotle's standard of moral merit would be hard or impossible to achieve in a modern society. I think it's a great ideal. I would love it if our society paid pastors more or social workers working in the inner city more than it does. It doesn't pay them very much. But I think it would be hard to achieve. And the reason why I think it would be hard to achieve is because there are all sorts of logistical problems with figuring out who's morally meritorious. Okay, there are all sorts of problems with identifying those persons who are actually deserving. We live in a society of strangers. Okay, when you go around about your daily tasks, most of the people at the grocery store or at the bank, or people, in some other daily task part of life, are people who are strangers to you. And so it's hard or impossible for you to know how morally meritorious they actually are. And in a society of strangers, it would be incredibly difficult to implement a moral merit-based distributive system. Much easier to implement is this kind of a system, or this kind of a system like they have in other societies, not America. Yeah?
This is reflection. I was pondering it, and like you said, in theory it sounds great. On paper it really sounds wonderful. The execution, that's a whole different story.
Yeah,
And
that's where I am
thought
too.
to myself, with moral meritorious people, for example, let's say teachers or pastors, not every teacher and not every pastor is
Great.
actually a
True.
good person or just
Absolutely, yes.
So it would be also hard to distinguish that.
So just because you have a certain profession does not mean, there are all sorts of fraud pastors, right, or teachers who are not trying or something like that. Yeah, just because you have a certain profession does not mean that you are in fact morally meritorious. Although some professions are more generally associated, I think, with service work that is valuable to society, rather than like predatory work or something like that, right? So just to think about the moral merit of a profession, I know there may be some dispute on this, but a heart surgeon or a brain surgeon probably does more for the good of society than Mark Zuckerberg. Just speaking objectively, I recognize Zuckerberg connects a lot of people, but Facebook does a lot of damage too. And the fact that somebody is in a particular profession often does mean that that person is doing something that is more morally meritorious, but not always. It is not a one-to-one correlation. I totally agree with you, man. Good. Okay, so I'm going to move on from Aristotle. We're going to let that be that on justice, the topic of justice. He's got a lot to say about rectificatory justice, or righting the wrongs that have been done. What do you do in scenarios where, say, someone was negligent or didn't do his duty? He may not have intended wrong. What is the right way to compensate the victim of his negligence? He's got a lot to say about those kinds of issues, but I commend Book 5 to you, and we're going to have to move on to Augustine because of time and because we're behind on the syllabus. St. Augustine is a long time after Aristotle. His dates are 354 to 430 AD. Okay. St. Augustine lives 700 years after Aristotle. Just by comparison, 700 years ago from us is 1300, right? So that's a long time afterwards. And St. Augustine is separated from Aristotle by a couple of key events that shape his life and times and that are important for understanding his thought. So let me just describe those real quickly. This is, of course, in Western philosophy, and in the West, by far the most important event between Aristotle and Augustine is the rise of the Christian religion. Okay, but there's also an accompanying event that kind of makes that possible, and that is the rise of the Roman Empire. Okay, so those are the two events that separate Aristotle and Augustine: the Roman Empire and Christianity. Rome was an extraordinary phenomenon in the ancient world. it was very uncommon in the ancient world for empires to become as large as Rome did, or to be as well organized, or to have infrastructure like Rome developed. It was an extraordinary, extraordinary empire. And for the people who lived in the Mediterranean basin, Rome was the world. It was everything that they had, that they could imagine civilization being. Okay, now in the context of the Roman Empire, in about 30 or 33 AD, Jesus of Nazareth dies on the cross, and this small sect that was a spin-off of Judaism in Palestine becomes over time this very large world faith. Okay, and it captured the minds of millions of people in not just Rome but all over the Near East, in the ancient world. Okay, and St. Augustine was deeply touched by the Christian faith. And he is the first really big Christian philosopher that we're going to be encountering in this course. Okay, I find St. Augustine's life to be an inspiration. I'm a Christian. I believe the principles, the truths of the Christian gospel. And although I have disagreements with St. Augustine on a number of key topics, still I'm deeply inspired by his life and by just the way he went about his studies and developed his opinions. Let me give you guys a little bit in terms of biographical background on St. Augustine. Okay, the Confessions is not necessarily a philosophical work. Do you guys have it with you? Go ahead and pull it out if you got it with you. It's not necessarily a philosophical work. Okay, this is more of an autobiographical work. Kind of, think of it as the first ancient autobiography. And in this, St. Augustine recounts his life. He recollects when he was a kid, thinks about when he was a teenager, young man, the choices that he made, the ideas that he held. And in the middle, intermixed with all that autobiographical material, we encounter a lot of philosophical reflection. So what we're going to do in this course over the next couple of weeks as we study Augustine is we are going to extract from the text philosophical concepts that are actually located in the text in kind of a biographical way. So please do be diligent about reading the text, but know that the text is difficult and that it reads as an autobiography and not necessarily as a philosophical treatise. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to extract the philosophy from it. Now, I have to warn you, more than any other thinker we study in this course, St. Augustine's personal life is important for understanding his philosophy. Okay, so I'm going to take a minute and describe his personal life, what you'll find in the autobiographical material and the Confessions. And then we may or may not get a chance to actually get into the philosophy today. Okay, I will now attempt to draw the Mediterranean Sea. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, here's North Africa. Here's like Tunisia, Egypt, Palestine, Turkey. Okay, there's like Turkey, Greece, Italy. There's the Boots. Here's the Iberian Peninsula, modern-day Spain. Goes around like that. There are a couple islands here, Corsica, Sardinia. Here's Sicily. That's like not so bad, right? Kind of recognizable. Looks like a shark's mouth, sort of. Alligator mouth. Okay, St. Augustine is born in North Africa in a city called Tagaste. He is born to a Christian mother and a pagan father. His Christian mother's name is Monica. His pagan father's name is Patricius. Augustine is raised in Christian values by his mother Monica. However, it doesn't really take. He's kind of drawn by a lot of secular influences. And in fact, when he journeys at age 16 to the city of Carthage, a very important ancient city in North Africa, Carthage, he kind of falls into a life of sin and worldliness. Okay, he is studying as a student in Carthage the subject of rhetoric. What is rhetoric? What does rhetoric mean? Does anybody know? Yeah.
It's I don't know if I could say art, but art of persuasion, persuading others.
Absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely correct. Okay, persuasion, public speech, the art of political speech, sometimes you could think of it as that. And young men who were aspiring politicians back then studied rhetoric so they could learn to persuade others. And Augustine studies rhetoric, and he's a good student in Carthage. But he also does other things besides being a good student. He sleeps around with a bunch of different women, prostitutes and stuff, and actually takes a mistress and has a kid with her. Okay, and he abandons the Christian faith and kind of becomes an agnostic. Okay, what is an agnostic? What is agnosticism? Anybody know? Yeah.
I can take a stab at it. I have a friend who's agnostic, and she tells me that she does believe in a God, but she doesn't necessarily affiliate herself with any faith.
Okay, she's a theist, just a non-practicing theist. Yep, so she's not agnostic. If she thinks she's agnostic, she's wrong. But it's good guess. An agnostic is someone who says we don't have enough evidence to know either way whether God exists. An atheist is someone who says God does not exist. An agnostic is someone who says we don't know. We don't know. Okay? So Augustine is an agnostic. He journeys to Rome, where he teaches young aspiring politicians, young men, the art of rhetoric. Okay, there's this anecdote in the Confessions where he talks about how the way they would do payment for teachers is they would set up a box, and as the students filed out, they would drop money in the box to pay the teacher for the lecture for the day. Okay, I thought this was a good practice, and I'm actually going to do this today. No, I'm joking. Okay. So Augustine also recounts how the students would secretly sneak out the back so as not to have to pay him. And he couldn't make enough money as a teacher. Okay, so he moves to Milan, which is a city in northern Italy, northwestern Italy. Still there today, just like Rome, very important cities in Europe, in Italy. And in Milan, he becomes a Christian. Okay, has anybody been to Europe? Yes? Any of us? Okay, I've been to Northern Europe. I've never been to Italy. In Milan, he encounters people who are living lives of Christian faith in ways that are incredibly sincere and inspiring to him. Okay, the Bishop Ambrose, for instance, is living a life of piety and concern for the poor, of modesty and of humility. And Augustine finds this incredibly attractive. And he realizes that his own life has been very sinful, and he's led a life of incredible selfishness and destruction and exploitation of others. And he repents of this in a famous scene in a garden in Milan, and recognizes his own selfishness and sinfulness and gives his life to God. Okay, he then moves back to Africa. The last chapter of his life, moves back to Africa, where he spends a bunch of time in a city this is the real name of the city, Hippo. Spends over 30 years there as a bishop, and led an exemplary moral life, concern for the impoverished, wrote numerous books, taught numerous students, gave sermons, lived a life of piety and obedience. Okay, what is interesting about Augustine's life is how his personal circumstances shaped his philosophy. For instance, Augustine is very famous in the Western tradition for articulating the idea that human beings are sinners. Now, he's not the first one to say that human beings are sinners. It's a concept that's there in the biblical text. But Augustine formulates it in a way that's very rigorous theologically and actually has a name. It's a particular account of us being sinners. Let me spell this correctly. Augustine says we are original sinners. It's like a key theological, philosophical concept. And the idea there, the idea in original sin is that human beings have a kind of a disease or a sort of an intrinsic inherent malady. We always tend to do wrong things. Okay, we naturally gravitate towards the evil. A famous author from the 19th century, G.K. Chesterton, once said, he's a Christian, and he said, if there's any concept that there's abundant evidence for down through the generations, it is the Christian concept of sin, and that people are sinners. Because every new generation figures out a way to mess it up. Okay, it's just kind of a fact of life. And Augustine said, well, the reason why we all mess it up, even when we... each generation aspires to get it right, everybody messes it up, is because we're all afflicted with something called original sin. Okay, and he saw it in his own life. It came out of his own personal biography. He said, in my own life, I aspire to do good, and yet I cannot do the good that I aspire to do. Okay, he wanted to give up his sexual sinfulness, for instance. Okay, he fell into a sexual addiction for many years. In his early 30s, when he became a Christian, he wanted to give up his sexual sinfulness, but it was so hard for him to do, he just felt he couldn't do it. He said the reason why is because he was a sinner, because he had this disease-like condition. It's not a disease of the body, it's a disease of the soul. Okay, and it is a disease that infects or afflicts all human beings everywhere. I'll talk more about that next time, but it is a concept that comes right out of Augustine's biography, his personal biography. Again, he is not the first one to articulate it. The concept of sin is something that is there in the Christian tradition from the beginning, but he is somebody who articulates it very precisely and methodologically rigorously. Okay, and for that reason, he's very famous in the tradition. Questions or reflections on his biography or any of this background material? Any comments? Yes.
He had a Christian mother and a pagan father.
Correct.
He said he had more secular influences.
Correct.
Did his pagan father influence them, or was it mostly his mother?
It's mostly his fellow students. Yeah, so his fellow students were a real bad influence on him, and when he got in with the wrong crowd in Carthage, he fell into a bunch of sinful habits, I guess you could say, that were really hard for him to shake later on in life when he tried to clean his life up. Mm-hmm. Good. Any other reflections or questions? Folks, that's our real quick background to Augustine for the day.